Hey YouTube, what's good? What's good? What's good? All right, happy Friday the 13th. It is the 13th of August 2021, and it's Friday. And I'm not working today, so I have a little extra time. I've had a little more extra time in recent weeks. So I figured I'd talk to you about the Death card. Number 13 in the tarot card deck. Death. It's one of the more scarier ones, isn't it? I love the scary cards. I've always been like that. You know, back when I was a kid and I was having to do all the Bible stuff, my favorite book of the Bible was Revelations. I just really loved it. Everybody else was afraid of it, but I was drawn to the whole symbology, and it was, the book of Revelation is full of occult symbology. I mean, I'm just going to have to put it to you. If you're somebody who's afraid of this or thinks it's all evil and dangerous and bad, just click away. But understand that this is in your own book. Matter of fact, most of the main holy books of the different religions around the globe are filled with occult symbology. And this symbology is cross-cultural. We all experience these particular archetypes and ideas, no matter who we are, no matter what race or culture. We all experience life and death. Doesn't matter if you're Italian, Chinese, Puerto Rican, German. We all experience that. We all experience the ideal family and government and law and things like that. So these archetypes are embodied within the tarot card deck. And today I figured I'd talk to you about the Death card because it's number 13. And a lot of people think that the number 13 is bad, that it's evil. A lot of people are afraid of Friday the 13th. There's even a movie called Friday the 13th, right? Probably seen it. I think it's quite cheesy. I think those horror movies are just cheesy. They're so predictable. But back to this now. Back to this over here. Death. I'm going to talk to you about death. Excuse me, I have the sniffles. I have a cold because it's so hot out here that you have extremes of temperatures that you're constantly dealing with. When you're inside, you're in extra icy cold, air-conditioned buildings. And then when you go outside, like to your car, or when you need to go shopping or run errands, it's really, really hot. Super sweltering hot. Uncomfortably hot to make you want to run to your car. So hot. But in between all of that, your body just kind of gets confused and stunned, and the sniffles just start and the coughing starts. So bear with me with the sniffling. But in any case, I did take my cold meds, so it shouldn't be too bad. Let's see. We're going to talk about the Death Tarot card. I want to dispel a lot of foolishness around the Death card. A lot of fears and ignorance. That's one of my goals today, is to dispel and to really give you a deep perspective and insight into the tarot card, into this particular one, especially here. And perhaps open up some new doors for you, some new gateways for you that you can take away from this video. It's probably going to be quite lengthy. I like to dig deep into things. I'm not a superficial person when it comes to these topics. I can talk to you about it all day long if we both have the time. All right, so two of the more scarier cards within the tarot card deck for a lot of people, and especially people who aren't initiated or who don't know, who are beginners, might be the death card, excuse me, the death card and the devil card. They both start with D, by the way. So today we'll do the death card, number 13, excuse me, and excuse me, frog in my throat. Now keep in mind that we also deal with reducing these numbers to single digits. So 13 is reduced to 1 plus 3, which equals 4. And 4 has a sacred meaning. In the book, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, the Mathematical Archetypes of Nature, Art, and Science, this is one of our references that we're going to use today, by Michael S. Schneider. On page, starting on page 60, chapter 4, the tetrad, the keyword is mother substance. So keep that in mind when we go over the death card, mother substance. How does that fit in? How does this fit in with the archetype of death? And by the way, this card doesn't necessarily mean physical death. Most of the time, it does not mean physical death. This is another secret that a lot of people who work with tarot, who don't know about tarot cards, don't know that this card doesn't mean physical death. It can mean that sometimes, but most likely it does not mean that if it shows up in your divination readings. And if you're using it, you're definitely not going to have, you're not going to die, and people aren't going to just start dropping like flies around you because you've been working with the death tarot card. That's not going to happen. I've been working with this card for over a decade. And while there is death, physical death, yes, in this world, especially now with COVID, it's probably a good idea to work with this card and kind of confront that because, we all have that fear of death to some degree or another. It's just part of human nature to be afraid of the unknown and something that we may not understand and that we have a lot of fear around. There's a lot of things in life that are like death in that respect, right? So back to this mother substance. I'll give you a couple of quotes here at the beginning of this chapter. It says, "One cannot help but be in awe when one contemplates the mysteries of eternity, of life, and the marvelous structure of reality." That was by Albert Einstein. Another quote, "To know the order of nature and regard the universe as orderly is the highest function of the mind." Baruch Spinoza. Of course, he's the Dutch philosopher, right? You know about Spinoza, right? "The perfection of mathematical beauty is such that whatsoever is most beautiful and regular is also found to be most useful and excellent." Sir Darcy Wentworth Thompson. So I'm hoping that you can have some useful takeaways today from this video. Vitruvius, the first century Roman architect, engineer, and writer, says, "In all their works, the ancients proceeded on definite principles of fitness in ways derived from the truth of nature." Keyword truth of nature when you're looking at this symbol here. "Thus they reached perfection, approving only those things which, if challenged, can be explained on the grounds of truth." So another keyword linked to mother substance is truth, truth of nature. "What canst thou see elsewhere, which thou canst not see here? Behold the heaven and the earth and all the elements, for these are all things created." By Thomas A. Kempis, the German ecclesiastic and writer, of course. And then another quote here by Pindar. He was a Greek lyric poet from 522 BC. He says, one race there is of men, one of gods, but from one mother we both draw our breath. So he's basically saying that humans and gods both draw their breath from one major archetype, the four, the number four, the mother substance. Okay. Now, if you want to know more about the sacred symbology of the number four, which basically equals 13, remember 1 plus 3, that's what it is reduced to. We reduce these numbers into singular digits because these singular digits have sacred meanings. They are the core archetypes behind the visuals that you see in the tarot cards. And that's basically going into a whole numerical and mathematical structure beyond just the symbolism that you're seeing in the cards. But again, check out this book, Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, The Mathematical Archetypes of Nature, Art, and Science, A Voyage from 1 to 10 by Michael S. Schneider, Schneider. I'm going to leave it in the description later. And it starts with chapter 4. Okay, so we might go back to that a little bit later, but I want to go ahead and get started with you on this. But the books that we're going to use: Boundaries and Relationships, Knowing and Protecting the Enjoying the Self by Charles L. Whitfield, M.D. The Kabbalistic Tarot, a textbook of mystical philosophy by Robert Wang, W-A-N-G. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It has an introduction, but it is the first complete translation by Penguin Classics. It is the deluxe edition. We're also going to reference A Garden of Pomegranates, Scrying on the Tree of Life by Israel Regardi, edited and annotated with new material by Chick Cicero and Sandra Tabitha Cicero. We're going to be working with page 81, the Hebrew letter Nun. Nun, down at the bottom, when you see the, look far down at the very far bottom there, next to the word death on the left-hand side. It's my left-hand side. That is a Hebrew letter. That letter is called Nun. Okay, so we're going to work with that. On the other side, that's the symbol of Scorpio, by the way. And right above that symbol, you do see the scorpion, don't you? So we'll be talking about that a little bit later, too. Let's see. Another book we might be working with is called Methods for Immortality, Death, Beginning or End by Dr. John Mumford. And we're also going to be talking about the Syntopicon. The Syntopicon and okay. What I meant was The Great Ideas by Mortimer Adler. You can also check out the Syntopicon. It is a much more extensive version of that. But basically, The Great Ideas is a lexicon of Western thought. Okay, you're talking about the last 2,500 years. So, a little bit of info on what this is. 45 years ago, Mortimer Adler sat down at a manual typewriter. By his side was a list of authors, a pyramid of books, and 102 great ideas. 102 objects of thought that have collectively defined Western thought for more than 2,500 years. So that's the kind of level we're dealing with. I'm also going to throw in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I've already mentioned, from the East. So we don't have just Western bias. We also use whatever is there, whatever we can grab from. Also, let's see, what I want to tell you about the 100 great ideas. No matter what culture you're from, no matter where you're from, what part of the globe, we all have about 100 major ideas in common, give or take. In this case, Mortimer Adler found 102. But when you look at them closely, beyond the superficial level, which what we're going to do with the idea of life and death, you're going to see so many other ideas interrelated with them. For example, immortality. The idea of immortality immediately comes up when you speak on the topic of death, because you have an opposite, which is life. What is the opposite of death? Life. So immediately you have a link from death to life. And from there, you have a link to immortality. The question of immortality. Are we immortal in some way? Do we have a soul? So now the topic of soul comes into play with the topic of death. You see, and this is basically what he has compiled, all of these major ideas that affect us all of us. We all have the question of, is there a soul? Some of us believe in a soul, some of us don't, right? Do you believe in a soul? Do you believe in immortality? Do you believe in life after death? Do you believe in life after life? Do you believe in life after love? Love after life? Okay. I was going somewhere with that, but what was that song called by Cher? Do you believe in love after life? Anyway, so there's about 100 or so major mental structures, archetypes, that are common to all of us and that have been common to all of our ancestors too, you see. All right. So from there, that reminds me, and I personally link those 100 great ideas, 102, give or take. Like I said, they start to interrelate. And so it's not exactly 100, you see, but it's give or take. It reminds me of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett and their 100 mental models that they have mentioned all throughout the years in their annual reports and in their annual meetings. And basically, what are the mental models he's talking about? Now, I want you to understand this is more like free association, okay? I'm not saying it's the same exact thing as this over here, okay? So understand what we're doing here is using correspondences. Charlie Munger has talked about mental models and their use in thinking better. He credits mental models for his unusually sharp understanding of the world, so they are worth learning about. What is the mental model? Mental models are an explanation of how things work. They are how we decide what variables matter in a given situation. So this is all about decision making, right? Making the right decisions, the best decisions or better decisions, and how those variables interact with one another. Mental models are how we make sense of the worlds. So going from there, I'm going to go back to linking the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the 100 deities within the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And those 100 deities are split into wrathful and peaceful deities. And basically, once a person dies, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they may experience a variety of these deities depending on the kind of life that they have lived and their mental and emotional and spiritual and physical life that they've lived, you see. And all of this fits together. It may seem like I'm all over the place, but once again, this is a different kind of thinking. This is more like linking different chains and different links together, different pieces together. And it might take a little time. You might not be able to get it right away from just one video. It's something that you might need to marinate on. But let's get started on this death thing in relation to all of this. Did I call out all the books we're going to use? The Tarot Handbook, Practical Applications of Ancient Visual Symbols by Angeles Ariad. Tarot symbols from a psychological, mythological, and cross-cultural perspective. All right, so we talked about the number 13, starting with number 13. In some countries, the 13 is considered lucky. In some cultures, 13, Friday the 13th, would be a very lucky day, and I personally consider it a nice day. I think the number 13 is a wonderful number. So what does this death really mean? Death comes in different flavors. You know, like Baskin Robbins has 32 different flavors. I think death comes in different gradations. Physically, your body dies off completely every 7 years, right? I think the cells that you have now, 7 years from now, none of the cells that comprise your physical body will be alive anymore. So basically, we're constantly dying. Your whole entire body, your brains, your kidneys, your arms, your skin, your hair, your eyes, your heart, all of that regenerates every 7 years. The cells that you had 7 years ago are no longer in existence that comprised your heart, your skin, your hair. They're all dead and gone. They all fall off. But yet, you're still the same, right? You're different too. You're not the same person you were 7 years ago, right? There's been growth, there's been experiences, and all of these things change you. But yet you're still the same. You're still you. So the bones of who we are always remains the same. As you can see in this picture here, in this tarot card. The bones of who you are, the truth, the true nature of who you are. This is a gateway. This is the archetype. This goes directly to the bones of who you are. And the bones of who you are is like energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. So keep that in mind, that this is about the truth, the bones of who you are, the deep level of you. This is a deep type of transformation, change. Yes, it's an ending, but with every ending, there is a new beginning. And with every beginning, there is an ending. It is two sides of the same coin. Now, let's look at this here. We see a snake here. We see a fish. Up above, it looks like he's wearing a crown, or she. It's not anything of a gender. This could be a male or a female. It's just a skeleton. The physical flesh is gone. So this individual has a crown headdress here, which represents royalty. So this is a very, very noble royal energy, intelligence archetype that you're working with, that you're unlocking from within. Remember, all of these things are within us. These are like organs. These are psychic organs. These are mental, emotional, spiritual organs that we possess. And this is helping you. This facilitates you to tap into your own empowerment and into your own abilities here. You see a winged bird creature right behind the headdress there, like an eagle. And eagles can fly from far above. They can see a bigger perspective. They can see a broader perspective. So this is about rising above your own situation. Meditating on this card for 15 to 20 minutes a day if maybe you're facing some kind of problem. This card is very excellent for interrelationships, relationships of all sorts, be they professional or personal. This is an excellent card for detaching and helping you to set boundaries. Boundaries and limits You also see what looks like a web, strings, or things attached to the skeleton here. And then you see these embryos, these abstract circles with embryos in them, possible lives. And then down at the bottom, you see them too. They're kind of fluid, even. It looks like they might even be in amniotic fluid. Down at the bottom, you see a scorpion. And I think they're not quite sure what the plants are, but we can go ahead and take a look at that from the Tarot Handbook. See what it says. 13. So it says here, death / rebirth is a symbol that represents the universal principle of detachment and release. It is through letting go that we are also give birth to new forms. Okay, so these beings, people type forms, this is letting go of old things and releasing and moving on and able to give birth to new forms. Cutting through old binding patterns allows us to let go of the old. Which is represented by the Piscean fish, and give birth to new or unexpressed parts of ourselves, represented by the Aquarian fetus-like figures. Death is the Scorpio symbol, which is down at the bottom there, the scorpion, in the deck. Scorpio has 3 symbols which represent the 3 types of transformation, or death, rebirth stages. The scorpion represents that part of ourselves that is willing to protect or take care of ourselves during times of change and letting go. And that right there is very crucial. This has a protective energy because change is scary. It's uncomfortable, right? So what usually happens when you're changing, even if it's a good change, even if it's the change that you want, it still can be scary. So this has a protective, stable energy to it. The snake reminds us that in order to transform, we must let go of old identities in order to be able to express new ones, much like a snake that sheds its skin, and the phoenix or eagle reflects the overall vision and perspective that is needed in order to become even more of who we are. The bird within our nature is the spiritual essence that is always free, vital, and irrepressible. So this is also a freeing archetype. This is about liberating yourself in very, very important and deep and profound ways, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. So, it is the part of our nature that prompts us to let go so that we can give birth to greater parts of who we are. The skeleton is the inherent structure within our body that allows movement and change within our self-expression. The bones of who we are represents our ancestral lineage and our present commitment to grow and evolve through repeated death, rebirth experiences. So this is about growth. This is about life as much as it is about death. This card is so much more than death, and it's not to be feared. As you can see, it is about liberation, freedom, life, rebirth. The crown is a universal representation of expanded consciousness. It is humankind's initiation of the halo effect. All cultures have crowns and headdresses. Here, the crown is the Egyptian funeral headdress with a phoenix emerging from it to remind us that death itself is a rebirth experience. So, this is partially based on the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is another reference that I think I would probably recommend for further reading. For those of you who want to go further with this, check out the Egyptian Book of the Dead, spell number, I believe it was spell number 68, Coming Forth by Day. That's what it's called. So yeah. Here, let's see. We've got here the crown is the Egyptian funeral headdress with a phoenix emerging from it to remind us that death itself is a rebirth experience. The sickle or scythe is a harvestation tool. It has the capacity to cut through things for the purpose of yielding harvest. So you reap what you sow. This is the idea of a karma, right? But it's not the punishment karma. Think of it as investing. This is why I mentioned Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, right? This is what you invest. The life that you live will be reflected in the death that you experience. It makes sense, right? And I think most everyone can somehow identify with that. If you put out good, most of the time you're going to get back good. And this is reflected in your whole life. So there's an element of harvest here. The death rebirth experience is one that reminds us that by letting go, which is represented by the wilted flower down there by the scorpion, we are able to allow some new life to emerge and express itself, the sea kelp, which is on the other side. So that's very interesting. That's why those two pieces, the sea kelp and the wilted flower, are right there next to the scorpion, because you must let go to let the new life into your life. I mentioned different flavors of death beyond just physical. There are such things as psychological death, emotional death, a spiritual type of death. Things can die. Relationships can die. Projects can die off. Businesses can die off. A lot of businesses have died off, aside from people, because of COVID, right? So there are different kinds of deaths. And metaphorically speaking, going through a death experience of some sort can be life-giving. It really can. Letting go of old habits, unhealthy habits, whether it's smoking, drinking, overeating, gambling, spending, overspending. These habits can all be let go. So this is a card of letting go, detaching and letting go of people, places, and things that are toxic, that are not healthy, that are dysfunctional, that are no longer healthy for you, that no longer work for your well-being. And this could include family. Unfortunately, for some people, it can include letting go of old traditions that no longer serve you, that may have been crucial in causing pain and dysfunction. So, the death rebirth symbol facilitates the process of letting go and moving forward. If you have difficulties in letting go, This symbol will assist your process of detachment through creative visualization and invoking the death rebirth symbol in your meditation. This symbol assists your process of letting go of old identities, lifestyles, relationships, and careers so you can give birth to new forms. When you pull this symbol or find yourself continually drawn toward it, it represents your capacity to change and transform at deep levels. You are actively involved in an archetypal process of letting go of old patterns or relationships so that you can experience and express new parts of yourself. This symbol can also represent that you may be in the process of restructuring your relationships with Scorpio people in your life. Anyone born October 21st through November 21st, or that in the month of Scorpio, you may be required to let go of certain situations that you can be free to move forward in new directions, either personally or professionally. So this is also about moving forward in new directions. You didn't think this death card meant all that, had all that within it, right? It packs huge, a lot of info, a lot of meaning, a lot of deep, super deep. It's not what you might have thought it was. It's definitely not anything to be afraid of. The death rebirth symbol is the changing expression of personal power and leadership in the world. So we go from mother substance to letting go, detachment, rebirth, life, immortality, death, to now personal power and leadership and freedom. Hey, that all sounds pretty great, right? This is a card of empowerment, because if you're able to detach from things, think of how much money that could save you. You know, we all have gazingas pins and things that we spend on, that we overspend on or tend to overspend on, right? Maybe it's that Starbucks you get every morning. That stuff adds up after a while. You know, that could be a couple of grand a year that you're spending just on Starbucks. You know, and you could do a lot with a couple of grand. Some people have porn addictions, you know, and they spend all their money on porn, or gambling addictions. You spend a lot of, they spend their whole paycheck on gambling. What if you could detach from these things, from these desires? That could save you a lot of pain. What if you could detach from conflicts, at least in a healthy way? Detach from other people's baggage and not get swept in or easily triangulated in other people's drama. You know, think of all the headache and hassle you could save. So this is a lot of empowerment here. The death card, the number 13, adds up to 4. Again, remember I said 1 plus 3. 13 is reduced to 1 plus 3, which equals 4, is the externalized expression of the internal emperor within us. And an emperor is not the same as a king, by the way. An emperor is much more powerful than a king. Think of the king as being the manager of a company, and the emperor being the president in that company. Okay? In order to own our full power and inherent leadership, represented by the emperor, we must be willing to change and transform ourselves continuously, which is represented by this death rebirth card. All change requires that we let go in order to experience the new or unexpressed parts of ourselves, which is the death card. Our full power and leadership, represented by the emperor, is required during times of death and rebirth. So this is about also tapping into your full power. That's why he or she has that crown, that headdress, you see. This is an empowering archetype. Empowering yourself through the death experience and the life experience. It is during times of change that we must know what our boundaries and limits are, represented by the 4 of discs. that we be open to negotiation and truth, represented by the Four of Swords, that we follow what has heart and meaning, represented by the Four of Cups, and that we remember that we are essentially whole and complete, represented by the Four of Wands. So this is the Emperor constellation that this card, the Death card, belongs into, which is represented by the number 4. Stability, mother substance, going back to square one. Think of the saying 4 square meals. Think of the saying squaring off in a conflict. They squared off with each other. All of these meanings, all of these quotes and ideas bring you right back to that main core truth. Your true nature. The true source that we all come from. The mother substance. Okay? So, we have the constellation that this belongs into, and I might do another video on that, is the number 4. Again, 13 boils down to 1 plus 3, which equals 4. So, let's go a little further. I have the one upright and then the one upside down. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the other keywords that are associated with this card. The zodiac sign is Scorpio. We talked about Scorpio there. The Kabbalistic letter is Nun. Some of the crystals that are associated with it is amber, black tourmaline, and you can get these things at the local occult bookshop or New Age shop. I think they should be under $10. I've seen them in a lot of places where they're like $1 or $2 for the small ones. But again, you see those keywords there: creation, destruction, transition. And you see this one here is a little different. As you see, the skeleton has an armor there, a protective armor. Again, that's that energy of protection. This archetype here is very complex. You know, it's not just death and that's it. There's so much more to it. It encapsulates its own opposite, because the death also is intertwined with life. So therefore you have creation, destruction, and transition. So it's basically a transition from one of the polar opposites to the other end, right? But this isn't, this is also a balancing type of energy here as well. Down at the bottom there, you see a man laying down, and his crown looks like it fell off his head, and I assume he's dead. And you have here a clergy there, a pope, looks like it's from the Catholic bias there, a pope, and he looks like he might be clasping his hands and praying, or praying for forgiveness or mercy, or maybe even doing a prayer for the that person there on the ground. You see a small child down there in blue with looks like flowers. And then next to him, it looks like it's a key. You see that down there? I think that's a key. And then the little kid in blue is holding the arm of the girl in white who has her head turned. And it looks like she's dropped the flower. She's letting go of something there. So there's that aspect of letting go. and she doesn't seem to be very comfortable. You know, it might even be a mourning or a grief of sorts. Come on. Come. Good cat. Let's talk about the Kabbalistic letter Nun. This is from The Garden of Pomegranates, page 81. A Garden of Pomegranates, Scrying on the Tree of Life by Israel Regardi. Let's see, I want to go back to the Hebrew letter Nun down here at the bottom, at the far bottom. This is what I'm talking about. This is the letter Nun here. And this Hebrew letter corresponds to this whole archetype of death and rebirth. It also has a numerical equivalent. So there are deeper meanings to the Hebrew language, the Hebrew words that are written. There's a whole other level of communication that most people have no clue about. So Nun is the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It represents path number 24 on the Kabbalistic tree, which joins Tipareth to Netzach. This is, as you can see, the one in green here. That's the path that I'm talking about, path number 24 between Tipareth, which is symbolized by the sun, and Netzach, which is symbolized by Venus. So keep that in mind. Numerical value of this letter is 50. Pronounced Nun means fish. The correspondences again appear to follow the astrological interpretation, which is Scorpio. The reptile fabled sting itself to death. The reptile fabled to sting itself to death. Okay. Mars rules Scorpio, and its Greek god is therefore Mars. Its Roman god, Ares. Apep, the Egyptian god, and an immense serpent is attributed here. So that's why we saw the snake. That's why we see snakes in those tarot cards, because it is related to Apep. Kundalini is the Hindu goddess representing the creative force, libido, coiled up as a serpent at the base of the spine in the so-called lotus of the Muladhara chakra. Its magical formula is regeneration through putrefaction. So again, this is this idea of regeneration, rebirth, death and rebirth. The alchemists of old used this formula mainly. The first common matter of their operations was base and had to pass through several stages of corruptions or putrefaction, or chemical change as it would be styled today, when it was called the Black Dragon. But from this putrid stage, the pure gold was derived. Another application of the same formula applies to that psychological state of which all mystics speak, the spiritual dryness or the dark night of the soul, wherein all one's powers are held temporarily in abeyance, gathering in reality strength to shoot up and blossom forth in the light of the spiritual sun. Its sacred animal is therefore the beetle, representing the Egyptian god Khepra, the beetle god of the midnight sun, symbolizing light and darkness. During the mystical state referred to, the whole of one's inner life appears in the most heartbreaking manner conceivable to be torn asunder. The tarot attribution of death continues this conception, picturing a black skeleton mounted on a white horse. reminding us of one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, armed with a scythe, mowing down all and everything with which he comes into contact. Its Yetziratic title is the Imaginative Intelligence, and its jewel is snakestone, color beetle brown, perfume opoponax, its plant cactus and all poisonous growths. So there we have those attributions to this particular card. Again, it's talking about the end of a cycle, change, transformation, a new beginning, letting go and moving on. Letting go of dysfunctional family dynamics, letting go of people that are toxic, letting go of your own baggage. There's a lot about this that is about an inner letting go of your own conflicts, letting go of how you might have beat yourself up over something. So this is also about detaching from your own baggage, your own dysfunctional habits, letting them go, transforming and changing, growth, evolving. It's unlikely that this card actually represents a physical death. Typically, it implies an end, possibly of a relationship or interest, and therefore implies an increased sense of self-awareness. So, another idea, key idea with this tarot card is self-awareness. The number 13, all about self-awareness, huh? And again, when we're talking about going back to your own nature, the bones of who you are, your true nature, the truth, the mother substance of who you are, then you're going back to that self-awareness. Pretty interesting, isn't it? Let's see, we have Saturn in house 8, the planet of the border, the separation, the farewell in the house of death and rebirth. The zodiac is Scorpio, tree of life, the axis Tipareth, connecting with Netzach. The element is water. So here we have a strong emotional component. "13 as the number destroying the perfection of the 12. There hardly is a card provoking so many oops in a reading. Never forget that the death is meant as an archetype, a symbol. The death represents the never-ending cycle of death and rebirth as the precondition for new life and creation. For life is permanently changing. Hello and goodbye, leaving and arriving. The death will show that something has ended and something will begin, and doesn't care if the end is painful and the new beginning welcomed or vice versa. The card implies the need to let something go and requires the understanding of the circles of life." Oop. The negative aspect of the card could plainly mean that we want to keep what we have to give up, that no change is welcomed. In most cases, it is just a refusal to understand and accept. It can mean we are scared of loss and also afraid to restart. The drive, death and rebirth, end and beginning, transformation and metamorphosis, inner wisdom, consequence. The light of this card, making place for something new, getting rid of old loads and achieve new spaces. The shadow aspect of this card is fear and loss. So if you're dealing with a lot of fear of loss, if you're dealing with fear and loss, this is an excellent card to meditate with. All right, let's see. We went through that. Okay, I did a comparison here. We have the death card from the Kabbalistic Correspondence deck. It's a collector's item, by the way. Amazing deck. We have the Quantum Physics deck in the middle. And then we have the Hermetic Tarot card deck on the far end there in black and white. So let's take a look at that for a bit. It's always good to compare different kinds of tarot cards, different versions. You get a deeper understanding of that archetype. And in the far left there, above the skull, you see the dark fish, and then you see the letter noon, and you see the numerical correspondence 50. Underneath the fish there, you see the yellow dung beetle there, that kefra, the dung beetle that we talked about the other day. You also see the Kabbalistic tree there, path number 24 between Tiparet and Netzach. You also see the number 300. So that corresponds to Gematria, which the word, I think the Hebrew word for death equals 300. You also have cactus there. And you have on the top the imaginative intelligence. That's from the Sefer Yetzirah. That's what it is called there. You have the idea of necromancy. In the middle here, you have the quantum tarot. This is the Quantum Tarot version 2.0 by Kay Stofford and Chris Butler. I'll read you what it says there. Death, matter, and antimatter. Every particle has a corresponding antimatter particle. Antimatter has the opposite charge to ordinary matter. For example, the negatively charged electron has a positive antiparticle known as a positron. When a particle meets its antiparticle partner, they annihilate each other in pure energy. Oh, so these two skeletons here are matter and antimatter, and they're meeting, and they are annihilating into pure energy, which is symbolized in the middle there. You see that pure energy? This energy goes on to form other particles. There is a theory that in the very early days of the universe, they were almost equal parts of matter and antimatter. But because there was a slightly more matter, it quickly annihilated all the antimatter, and we ended up with a universe composed solely of matter. We might like the idea of vanquishing physical death in the same way that matter destroys antimatter. But would it really be so great? Matter and antimatter may annihilate each other, but out of that combustion come new energy and new forms. This part of the constant dance of change that is our universe, and the death card represents the destructive part of that cycle. As human beings, we are constantly changing and adapting to our environments, but paradoxically, we also resist change. If the change is for the better, it often comes with a certain amount of resistance, perhaps because change is essentially a form of death, and it reminds us of our own mortality. So that's very, very interesting there. That is a very interesting rendition of the archetype of death in the quantum physics tarot deck there in the middle. All right. Now, let's look at this Child of the Great Transformers one on the far end there, the black and white one. Definitely a lot of skulls and skeletons. You see the eagle on the top left there, symbolizing what? Freedom, larger perspective, letting go. I see the scorpion there on the bottom half. I see a lot of bones that look like they've been just, cut up by that harvesting tool. And he's got actually the tip of it, he's got all the way through that skull there. So this is also a penetrating self-awareness. And sometimes that can be pretty painful, you know what I mean? Because we all have light and dark aspects of ourselves, and there are aspects of ourselves that we really don't want to face, and we really don't want anyone else to come tell us about them either, right? But sometimes life will tell you about yourself. But how much more empowering would it be if you're on top of your own light and dark aspects and taking a deep penetrating look into yourself, those dark aspects of yourself that you might not have wanted to confront? This is what this card is about. Bringing those aspects to your conscious awareness for your examination and for your awareness. So this is definitely an interesting card here. Of course, I see the symbol of Scorpio there. And there's a lot of other symbology there. I see the snake on the bottom of the skull, on top of the bottom part, on the bottom left. There's another skull that has a snake on top of it. So yeah, definitely very interesting stuff. Speaking of death, the book Methods for Immortality, Death, Beginning or End by Dr. John Mumford has some interesting stuff about death. I want to read it to you because when you're thinking about death, again, this topic, death and rebirth, you think you really know what it means, right? You think you understand, well, what is death? Well, death means somebody's dead. They're not alive. They're not conscious of the world here. They're not here anymore. Their body disintegrates. On page 17, Methods for Immortality, Death, Beginning or End by Dr. John Mumford. I'll read it to you here. Medical viewpoint of death. There's different flavors of death. Here's what I mean by it. First of all, we consider death from a medical viewpoint, then we will look at some anatomical facts. Medical death in the 18th and 19th century. From a medical viewpoint, death until the beginning of the 20th century was pretty straightforward, cut and dry. By the 1950s, death had become an immensely complex topic. To the 18th or 19th century physician, death meant cessation of heartbeat and of lung action and respiration. So your heart didn't work anymore and you didn't breathe. That's what death was. If the heart stopped and the breathing stopped, the person was unresponsive to pinching or any stimuli, and the jaw dropped slack with the eyes open, then death was almost a certain diagnosis. Okay, so these were the indicators of death. At death, the eyes open and assume a doll's eyes look. When the head and the eyes move together in whatever direction the head is pushed, just like a doll, the reflexes are absent. The classic 18th, 19th century test was to put a mirror before the mouth. If the mirror did not show fogging, then death was considered conclusive. The diagnosis was simple in those days, but gradually, as Western medicine's resuscitation techniques became more and more sophisticated, the line began to blur. We now have to divide death into two categories, clinical versus biological death. So, did you ever think that you might have to divide that into two categories? I never thought about it before I went and really explored this archetype, this tarot card, the idea of death. I thought, well, you don't breathe, your heart stops, yeah, you're dead. But it's a lot more complex than that. A lot more complex than that. And by the way, that antimatter and matter deal Actually, scientists have not been able to tell us if we aren't the antimatter. We assume we are the matter and the antimatter was destroyed, and that's why we have a physical reality. But actually, in reality, scientists have not been conclusively able to determine whether or not we were the antimatter in the beginning and the other was the matter. So, yeah, think about that. Yeah, very interesting stuff. You can Google some of that too sometime. Look up Ray Kurzweil, matter versus antimatter. I think you can get started with that phrase and you'll find some interesting stuff. But back to this. So you got to divide death into clinical versus biological. Let's go on. The different diagnosis between clinical and biological death becomes very important in today's world. Clinical death basically means that the heart has ceased beating and that respiration has stopped. Okay, yeah, I get that. At this stage, we have about 3 to 5 minutes to start pumping oxygen to the person to ventilate them and to get the heart going. 5 minutes is very rough rule of thumb. The implication is that if the heart isn't restarted within 5 minutes, supplying oxygen to the brain, there will be irreversible brain damage. The individual may be revived, but he or she is going to have brain damage. In fact, the rule of thumb has been broken many times. The lower the body temperature, the longer the time the person can go without breathing and without heartbeat and can still be resuscitated. So where does the death start to, where do you die? It's not an abrupt thing. It's not like a light switch. And it's getting ever more complex. Hypothermia. Remember a couple of years ago when some desperate person decided to hitch a ride on an intercontinental jet? He climbed into the little pit where the landing wheels retract. The aircraft climbed into 30,000 feet, cruising altitude where the oxygen level is very low and the temperature below zero. When the plane landed at the airport 5 hours later, a stiff chunk of ice fell out of the tarmac and bounced several times. It was the individual stowaway, thoroughly frozen and clinically dead, no respiration and no heartbeat. Okay, this guy, I guess maybe he was on drugs. I don't know what would possess somebody to do this. But anyway, he hitched a ride and come to find out the altitude was below zero, the temperature, and there was not any oxygen. And he fell out stiff, frozen, and no respiration, no heartbeat. He was thawed out and successfully revived without any consequent brain damage. 3 years ago in Sydney, an infant fell into a swimming pool in the middle of winter, sank peacefully and quietly to the bottom, and it was an hour before they discovered the child. In the winter, submerged under ice-cold water for an hour with no breath or heartbeat, yet a medical team managed to resuscitate the child. So the lower temperature in the body, when the heartbeat stops and the respiration ceases, the better the chances of reviving the patient without consequent brain damage. This is one way you get past the 5-minute rule. So we went from using mirrors to check if they were breathing, deciding, okay, the heartbeat isn't no longer beating, they're no longer breathing, they're dead, to now people being completely frozen for at least 5 hours or 3 or 4 hours, thoroughly frozen, not breathing. And being able to be revived. In hospitals, people die clinically and are placed on life support machines, and all sorts of tests are done. An hour later, they wake up and they're okay. Sometimes they awaken in the hospital morgue just before they're shipped to the friendly local undertaker for intravenous infusion of embalming fluid. Trust me, no one gets back after the embalming. Clinical death is one division. With clinical death, resuscitation is possible. There is, however, a borderline, and beyond that is biological death. So we have a range of what we call clinical death. And beyond that, it then turns into biological death. A corpse is much easier to lift once the muscle protein has started to break down and it has gone stiff, a state of rigor mortis. Before that point, approximately 4 hours after death, it is like lifting a sack of potatoes. Again, at the point of rigor mortis, biological death occurs. Two basic factors are present with biological death. The first is irreversible brain damage, particularly with a crushed brain. If your brain turns into mush, you will never be there. You will never be there again, not in that body. The second criteria is cellular death. So if you've studied anatomy and physiology, so you know that there are many, many cells in the body. 60 trillion, I think it's the number. Biological death occurs when cells themselves begin to disintegrate and decay. Once rigor mortis sets in, that is a very sure sign of cellular decay. Everyone knows that a cell has an outer cell wall and central nucleus, and each cell within it has a whole organ system. So just as you and I have a liver, heart, and intestines, so the cell have equivalent subunits called organelles. One of the most important organelles is called a lysosome. They call them suicide bags. Biologists call them suicide bags because lysosomes contain an enzyme that will dissolve protein. The function of these lysosomes is to digest waste in the cell. As biological death starts, the suicide bags, or lysosomes, empty their contents into each of these 60 trillion cells in the body, and gradually, over a period of 24 hours, the cells all die. So at the point of biological death, you literally dissolve in the acids released from your own cells, 60 trillion of them, rather like washing yourself down the drain. When that happens, I do not believe even Brahma, Vishnu, or Shiva can bring you back to life in this body. Once biological death sets in, it is totally irreversible. Establishing death. Is someone clinically dead or biologically dead? This becomes a very important question in hospitals. Currently, an EEG is ordered to determine if the brain is generating any electrical activity. Flatline EEGs are a good indication of a shifting from clinical death to biological death. Notice it says it's a good indication. In the United States, at one point, this determination was arrived by inserting one needle into the carotid artery and another needle into the jugular vein, then comparing oxygen levels in the blood at each location. If the oxygen level in the jugular vein was lower than the oxygen level in the carotid artery, even though there was a flat EEG, it indicated that some brain metabolism was going on. This crucial test helped to differentiate between clinical and biological death. Once biological death sets in, to the best of our knowledge, it is irreversible. Okay, so there's some food for thought on that. Different flavors of death, death and consciousness. Let's see what he says on that. Chapter 3. The West has always had this idea that there is no consciousness after death. The East has all kinds of ideas on consciousness after death. So, very interesting stuff. I encourage you to check this book out. But, yeah, bet you never thought that there would be different kinds of death, different categories of death. And don't forget, we still have mental and emotional types of death experiences, spiritual death experiences, you see. Death of projects, death of careers, death of businesses. These are all different flavors of death that you can look at. And rebirth, by the way, too, right? Don't forget the other side of death, which is rebirth. All right, the next thing I want to talk to you about, Tibetan Book of the Dead. Tibetan Book of the Dead. check out the Tibetan Book of the Dead when you get a chance in relation to this. Now, the whole gist of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's different than the Egyptian Book of the Dead, okay? You do have rituals here, too, to help you, they have rituals to help the dying person in their dying stage and after death stages, but they're very different than the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They're not the same. They're very different. First of all, it is a beautiful book just studying literature. The way it is written, the words, it is just amazing. It is just amazing writing. Studying metaphors, studying symbology. Again, this is an awesome reference. Studying psychology. This is, talk about some psychology. This is some deep stuff right here. Because essentially, the core message is that everything is mind, and your life experience, like your death, is all based on how you've lived in your mind. And nirvana, which we probably could equate to heaven or bliss or living forever in bliss, versus everyday cyclic existence, there is no difference. It is two sides of the same coin. Again, like life and death, right? Two sides of the same coin. Another key is attachment versus aversion. Being attached to things, codependency, being attached to outcomes, being attached to conflicts, being attached to people, places and things that might be toxic, right? Versus aversion to them. Again, aversion is the other extreme. Hate. Hating someone who wronged you. Again, it's the same problem. You're still attached. Even though you feel aversion, you have a strong, energetic, emotional charge, which once you die, there's that baggage that you're going to be faced with in your death experience, which can likely translate into one of the wrathful deities of what the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes. And no one experiences the same exact deities that are outlined in the Tibetan Book of the Dead the same way. It all depends on that person's cultural background. A person may experience that as malignant aliens doing terrible experiments on them in their death experience. And that would be what they would describe as the wrathful deities. So the whole idea is this baggage being carried on into your death experience and being carried throughout your life experience and letting go of that baggage and healing and growing and expanding. But the key here is attachment versus aversion, because you're still attached, even though you might be averse to something. There's still an emotional negative charge there. So detachment neutralizes both of that. You're not attached, but you also don't have that aversion. It's detachment. You're free of it. It's non-existent for you. Okay, so keep that in mind there. And it makes space for something better. More importantly, it makes space for life that is new and better. Let me read a couple of things here from the preliminary practice. It says here, all phenomena are ultimately selfless, empty, and free from conceptual elaboration. In their dynamic, they resemble an illusion, mirage, dream, or reflected image. A celestial city, an echo, a reflection of the moon and water, a bubble, an optical illusion, or an intangible emanation. You should know that all things of cyclic existence and nirvana accord in nature with these 10 similes of illusionary phenomena. All phenomena are naturally uncreated. They neither abide nor cease, neither come nor go. They are without objective referent, singleness, ineffable, and free from thought. So, let's see. What else was I going to tell you about this? Page 14. All compounded things lack permanence. Their essence is empty and selfless. But these naive beings right here who do not realize this to be so, roam through psychical existence, driven on by the 12 links of dependent origination, so that all beings gripped in this quagmire of name and form may attain Buddhahood. I must rouse my body, speech, and mind to the practice of virtue. So, again, you get this idea of death and life and rebirth being different sides of the same coin. So, let's see, we went through Tibetan Book of the Dead. I was going to show you page 77. Where do we have page 77? Before I put this book away. Page 77. What does it say here? Deep-seated habitual tendencies. Okay. As soon as we die and begin to transmigrate, at that very moment, when the visions, this is the daily practice, on page 77, at that very moment, when the visions of the intermediate state of reality dawn, and we roam alone in cyclic existence, driven by deep-seated habitual tendencies, may the heroic awareness holders draw us forward, leading us on the path of radiant light, which is the luminance of spontaneously arising pristine cognition. So this archetype also is about clarity, pristine cognition. All right. Let's see. We covered the Garden of Pomegranates, boundaries and limits. How does that fit in with the Death card? Of course, there's a boundary to the life. There's a limit to the life. And there's, just as there is an ending to the life, there's an ending to the death, which translates back to life. Using this card in meditation can help you in your mental health development. Like I said earlier, being able to detach in a healthy way, setting boundaries, that goes hand in hand, because you're setting boundaries with people, places, and things, including yourself. I like this card here. This is a very interesting one here. See this key in the middle? You see that key? Keys to the kingdom, the key to life, the key to death. A key. So this is another idea, a deeper meaning to the idea and the archetype of death, that there is a key that you have. This is a gateway. This is a key to something. This is unlocking something. A key to a door that you can open. This opens doors. I see an embryo over here on the right side. What do you see in this one here? There's orchids, right? Blooming orchids. I see an embryo here on the far right. across from the skull, in the middle, in the center there. I see the Vesica Pisces at the top there, the two circles intertwined, and then there's, oh my goodness, there's all kinds of geometric patterns and a heart. I see a spiral. Looks like a sigil is there too, some kind of sigil work. I see some numbers, looks like 1077, but there's something else in there. That's very interesting. The colors are also very interesting. I see a lot of pinks, pinkish hues, oranges, reds, greenish yellows. I see some violets. So this is an interesting deck here. We saw this one already. Number 1 is the armor there, the protective armor. You've got the white horse of purity. You got this symbol of a flower, blossoming, growth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have 5 petals here, which correspond to the pentagram. And the pentagram is nature's favorite geometric shape. You can see pentagrams everywhere. When you cut an apple in half, a star fruit, you see pentagrams everywhere. If you look for them in natural growth processes, you will see that 5-pointed star everywhere. You even see it in police uniforms. You know, they have the stars in legal logos. You see that 5-pointed star. You even see you see it on review sites, 5-star reviews, right? What does that mean? It means excellent. It means great. So that meaning there means perfection, excellence, quintessence. Let's see. Number 8 there, you have the sun. So this is the rising sun, the symbol of life and rebirth. Some of these other symbols here I'm not quite familiar with. I would have to look them up and do a subsequent video there, because I think this can get really, really deep there. I see a lot more in this card, in this image, than I did the other version of it. Musical note is G natural. Again, attributions, transformation, motion, change, shift, something ending and beginning, development, conversion. So this is another version of that. Let's see. Again, all of these have a skeleton in common, right? I think this is one of the basic ideas of the death archetype, is to have a skeleton there. The one here with the 3 heads on the bottom, the brown one here, is very interesting. You see people's heads decapitated by the harvesting tool in their hands, decapitated. So this is really like cutting through yourself, you know, being thorough with your own internal self-awareness, and looking and really reviewing yourself, looking at all your aspects, the good, bad, and the everything in between, right? And that's really what the death experience is. It just cuts through everything. It is an ending. It is a true ending. The one next to it here, he has his foot on somebody's head. So that's pretty interesting. Not that she would feel it, but... And he looks like he's walking forward. And he looks like he's swinging the harvesting tool there. So that's pretty interesting. And I think there might be an element to speed here. It looks like he's not, he's not going slow. It looks like whatever he's got around him is in the air there. What do you think that means? And then his wings are made of arrows. They go in pretty much every direction. That's interesting. And the last one here looks like the skeleton of a bird. So let's talk about boundaries in relation to death and rebirth and detaching and letting go. I really like this card. This is really, really interesting. I might redraw this one. I might use this as a study for a sketch or something. You have the idea of eternity, of life, right there in the center. You see the space and the stars. Reminds me of that quote, everyone is a star. We are made of stardust, after all. I like the pinkish reds. What do you call that? Fuchsia? I like these colors. I really am drawn to these colors too. And there's this element of eternity there. Light and eternity. Life, light, and eternity. Looking death in the face. Confronting death. You're looking death in the face. And down at the bottom there, you see death, and then you see the infinity symbol, and then rebirth next to it. This is a very positive card here. This is not to be feared or a scary one. This is a really, really empowering and positive card. So you have boundaries here. You see this boundary of a person outline. That's basically where you begin, where you end, and someone else begins, right? So what are your boundaries? What do you need to put boundaries around? Where do you distinguish yourself from what's the other person's stuff and what's your stuff? Well, that's your inner life. We all have an inner life, and that includes our beliefs, our thoughts, feelings, decisions, choices, experiences, whether it's a dream experience or a physical life experience or a mental experience or an emotional experience, it's still your inner life. Excuse me. Your wants, your needs, your sensations, your intuitions, your unconscious experiences, dreams, fantasies, repetition, compulsions, unfinished business. We all have this. This is part of what we call your inner life. So what are these factors? There's different types of boundaries. There's physical boundaries, mental boundaries, emotional boundaries, spiritual boundaries. Four major kinds. Your physical boundaries include how close someone stands or sits next to you, whether they are allowed to touch you, any kind of sexual behavior. It also includes eye contact. Some cultures don't allow eye contact that much. I think Chinese people I think it's rude to make eye contact with older people directly in their eyes. Some cultures think that that's rude not to make eye contact. So a lot of that also has to do with cultural boundaries. Privacy, someone going in your mail or in your diary, or opening the door when you're in the bathroom, or walking around nude, showing their body, using your telephone, or calling you at odd hours of the night, not giving you your privacy. clothes, shelter, property, money, physical differences, gifts. Some people force or want to force a gift on you. If you don't want to accept what they want to give you, then that needs to be a respected boundary. Pollution, food, noise, smoke. Sometimes neighbors may cross boundaries by making a lot of noise. 3 o'clock in the morning, they might be blasting the radio. Time and energy. Friends and family need to respect your time and energy. You might not have time to speak to someone on the phone as much as they might want to because of different responsibilities. So this is another thing. Mental emotional boundaries, beliefs, thoughts, ideas, feelings, decisions, choices, unfinished business, projections, energy, sexuality, needs, time alone, intuitions, individual differences, love interests, relationships, responsibilities, confidences, secrets, participation, roles, rules, messenger function. You ever have to deal with people that triangulate? They come to you and tell you what someone else thinks or says instead of the person coming to you directly. Have you ever done that? Have you ever triangulated another person to tell another person something for you where really you needed to tell them directly? So this is also part of boundaries, part of setting boundaries. Especially if you're dealing with conflict, you need to have direct communication. Don't triangulate other people in there. Spiritual. Personal experiences, relationship with true self, higher self, and higher power, spirituality, religion, spiritual path, spiritual preferences, spiritual practices. There are some people that are convinced that they have the only true religion and they must convince you of the same. And they overstep their boundaries because they're convinced they must tell you how to live and that you're wrong. So this is another thing where boundaries need to be put in place. Everyone needs to really make sure that they are on the right path and that they continue to be on the right path all their life. Need to focus on themselves before they point the finger at someone else. So this is part of setting healthy boundaries. Detachment from these conflicts in a healthy way to where you can process and deal with them in a balanced and functional way. So this was taken from The Boundaries and Relationships, Knowing and Protecting and Enjoying the Self by Charles L. Whitfield. Check out the last chapter especially on energies and boundaries here. This is page 235. From a physical, psychological, and spiritual perspective, boundaries can have components of energy. This energy may be derived from the individual boundary setter's inner life and projected or extended outward through their day-to-day life. At times, this and other forms of energy may be recognized and experienced by others. For example, when one person can read another person's aura or energy field, the energy may be associated with what is called a higher sense perception of psychic energy, wherein a person may have or develop certain psychic abilities, such as somehow knowing what is about to happen. People who have been abused as children may, and many who have had spiritual awakenings may develop these kinds of higher sense perceptions or psychic abilities, quote, more often and to a greater degree than the general population. Psychic abilities are our birthright as human beings. With a spiritual awakening, such awareness often becomes obviously quickly instead of emerging gradually. However, it could also overpower us because as unhealed adult children, our boundaries are not yet healthy and well defined. So this is about defining your boundaries. You didn't think that death had all of this encapsulated in this, right? You just thought that it was a simple idea and that was it, right? Has a lot more to do with a lot deeper levels of understanding. It says here, with a history of traumatic and abusive childhoods, by lessening our development of healthy boundaries and having a sudden increase in psychic sensitivity, we're likely to pick up others' moods and feelings even more intensely than before any spiritual awakening. So, again, if you're an empath, some people are empaths and they have a hard time not letting other people's energy get into their own circle of existence. So again, this is about detaching and letting go. Let's see here. This chapter talks a little bit more about psychic abilities and what actually it means. It's not quite the, it's not the new age fluff stuff. Remember, this is a mental health book. This is a book on mental health. It's written by a psychiatrist. So there's that. So I think we are good on that book. Let me see here. Back to Mother Substance, that was the book, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, The Mathematical Archetypes of Nature, Art, and Science, A Voyage from 1 to 10 by Michael S. Schneider. That's the chapter on the tetrad. So take a look at that book if you're interested, because that's going to give you a little bit deeper understanding into this archetype that we're talking about, and more importantly, the whole constellation it is a part of, because the death card is part of the Emperor constellation, which the secret number for that constellation is 4. And of course, 4 has a sacred symbolic meaning as well. And the key word for that is Mother Substance, or truth, going back to the bones of who you are, your true self. All right, let's see. This is another interesting one here. It has the Kabbalistic tree and it has the butterfly wings. It has the Eye of Ra at the top, the sun. It has the Ankh at the bottom, the cross of immortality, upright, transitions, change, reverse, resistance, tree of life. In English is Nun, the letter Nun. The astral signature is Scorpio. Keywords: dissolution, dissolving, disintegrating, metamorphosis, change, period of transition. Okay, one last book I want to recommend to you is The Great Ideas by Mortimer Adler, or the Centopicon. The Centopicon is a lot more fleshed out with these ideas. And again, this would be in the volume 1, The Great Ideas of Centopicon, volume 1, page 1013, chapter 48, Life and Death. I've made a mind map for you. Let me straighten this out. Okay, I'll straighten it out for you. I made a quick mind map for you. The Centopicon, chapter 48 on life and death. Pages 1013 through 1033 outline the topics. Check this out in relation to the Death Tarot card. Number 1, nature and cause of life. Naturally, when you're talking about death, you're going to have to talk about life, right? Soul as the principle. Again, when you're talking about life, the question of whether or not living beings have something that we call a soul and what that is. The second section is continuity or discontinuity between living and non-living things. When do things end as far as life, and when do they begin as far as death? Then we have different grades or modes of corporeal life. We have plants, animals, we have cellular beings. So we have different gradations. Not all life exists and evolves in the same way, right? We have amoebas and unicellular organisms that don't speak English. They don't drive cars, but yet they're still alive. Do they have a soul? Do dogs have a soul? Do birds have a soul? So these are things, these are questions that make the idea of life and death much more complex. Plants versus animals. And then we have what defines a plant, what defines an animal. We have nutrition. We have respiration, growth, and reproduction, different modes of reproduction and growth and respiration that define a plant versus an animal. But again, the line isn't as clear sometimes. So the more you dig into that chapter, you're going to find what some of the greatest minds have talked about and some of the complexities and problems we have in defining what life and death really is. Number 4, we have biological economy, the environment and interdependence of life forms. 5, vitality and impairment by disease, degeneration, enfeeblement of age, the nature and cause of health, the nature and cause of disease. So we have the idea of health and disease interlinked with the archetype of death and rebirth and life, right? Lifespan and life cycles, the next section, causes of death, transition from life to death, not abrupt. And some of the references I have for you is Hippocrates, his book on prognostics, his essay Prognostics, paragraph 10, section 21C, paragraph 21C. Lucretius, Nature of Things, book 4, page 907 through 961, section 56, A through D. Also, check out Sigmund Freud. Not much of a Freud person, but there are some things I will read up on. General introduction, his general introduction, paragraph 478, C through D, and then 617, B through C. Also, my man Aristotle, his book series, The Soul, book 1, chapter 4, and then also Aristotle's book, History of Animals, book 11, chapter 1, sections 23A through B. Baruch Spinoza, we talked about him a little earlier. His essays on ethics, part 4, proposition 67, section 444, D through 445A, and then check out Immanuel Kant, Fundamental Principle, Metaphysics of Morals, page 258, section 258B through 269. Okay, so yeah. Check that out. That's some deeper stuff there. But again, I think it's well worth your time. And the thing about Syntopicon is it's not going to tell you what to think. It is going to pose all of these different problems to you in really defining what life and death is, what some of the greatest thinkers have had to say on the topic, and then it leaves it up to you to form your own thoughts and your own conclusions. And that's what I love about it, because it's so freeing. There is an intellectual freedom with this. It's just amazing. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. Okay. So let's do a recap. Let's do a quick summary. Oh, before we do a recap, well, this is part of the recap. Number 13. We started off with number 13, Friday the 13th. 1 plus 3 equals 4. 13 equals 1 plus 3, which equals 4. It's boiled down to the number 4. Okay. But 13, many ancient societies, secret societies, and mystery schools understood that the number 13 represented death and rebirth through ascension into eternal life. And it represented the secret knowledge of all life, including sacred sexuality. And that's why you see the snake in some of the tarot cards, because it symbolizes the libido. And how do we become born? We become born through a sexual union of our parents. So there you see that is actually held as sacred. And a sexual unity between a male and female human in a loving relationship is something sacred. It is something sacred when it creates a new life form that is a result of that loving union. Okay. All right. So, however, 13 is just one of the sacred numbers for the moon. So the moon is associated with this too. So this is a deeper meaning too. Moon is a very potent force, along with 12, 19, and 29. So we might talk about those other numbers some other time, but keep in mind that number 13 is a sacred number, and it is one of death and rebirth, of ascension, of rising above your own situation, of transformation, positive transformation, of positive change, ascension into eternal life, and secret knowledge of all life. Remember, the most wisdom comes from within yourself. There's knowledge that you can't get from books or from Google, that you can only get from going within and taking a stark look at who and what you are, and working through your own issues and baggage, and setting those boundaries, and detaching from things that need to be detached from, holding on to what needs to be held on to, and letting go of what needs to be let go of. And that can include people, places, and things. The number 13 brings the test, the suffering, and the death. It symbolizes the death to the matter, or to oneself, and the birth to the spirit, the passage on a higher level of existence. In tarot, number 13 card is named as death, but it mostly means death of a struggling period and new beginnings. Death of your struggle, death of pain and misery, death of conflict, death of toxic people in your life. Not death of them, but the death of the toxicity, the death of the misery, the death of the trauma, the death of the pain. So new life can start, new things can begin. That's what today is all about. Friday the 13th. Okay, so thanks for tuning in, for watching. My movie recommendations for tonight are The Sixth Sense. That's a classic. I know it's a little dated, but I think it's worth watching again if you've already watched it. It's a great movie. Surviving Death documentaries on Netflix. They look pretty interesting. I've watched a couple of them already. It's a series, so... And it has some interesting stuff there. It has people's experiences. Whether you believe in it or not, I think it's still worth a good watch. Also, check out the Tibetan Book of the Dead documentary. You can YouTube search it. It's all over YouTube for free. Excellent, excellent material to watch and to really get to understand what the Tibetan Book of the Dead is about. Maybe I'll make a video on that sometime too. My my book recommendations for my bookworms, of course, are all the books I've mentioned today. But also, I want to throw Viktor Frankl in there. He is a very, very crucial psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor. He came up with logotherapy, and logo means word in therapy. So, word therapy, bibliotherapy, all of that kind of goes in together there. But his book, Man's Search for Meaning, definitely good reading in relation to this topic. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, definitely recommend you taking a gander at that, especially spell 68, Coming Forth by Day. Definitely take a look at that. And of course, The Syntopicon by Mortimer Adler, Boundaries and Relationships by Charles L. Whitfield, Tibetan Book of the Dead, Egyptian Book of the Dead, Methods for Immortality, Death, Beginning or End by Dr. John Mumford, A Garden of Pomegranates, Scrying on the Tree of Life by Israel Regardie, The Tarot Handbook, Practical Applications of Ancient Visual Symbols by Angeles Arian, Tarot Symbols from a Psychological, Mythological, and Cross-Cultural Perspective, The Kabbalistic Tarot, a Textbook of Mystical Philosophy by Robert Wang, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, the Mathematical Archetypes of Nature, Art, and Science, A Voyage from 1 to 10 by Michael S. Snyder. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate all your time. Let me know what you think. Let me know what other tarot card you might want me to do a video on. I love tarot cards. I can never get enough of them. I can talk to you all day about them. I've had a really great time doing this video here, and we'll talk again real soon.